So I was in a used bookstore and I wanted something fast and light and fun to contrast with all the nonfiction, all the heavy books I've been reading. And I like horror novels, so I picked up this book for $2 in a used bookstore called Shadows in the Watchgate by Mike Jefferies. I can't find any information about Mike Jefferies. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page. There's another guy on Wikipedia named Mike Jefferies, but they're not the same guy. I checked, even though Goodreads thinks they are the same. I did research and they're not. But he's written a few other books that are all in the horror fantasy genre, and not a one-shot author. Clearly successful enough to keep getting book contracts after this one. So I read this. It was terrible. It did all the things that horror novels should never do. So I've organized my thoughts on this and why it doesn't work into an internet-friendly numbered list. So if you are an aspiring horror writer out there, hopefully this will help you avoid some of the pitfalls that Mike Jefferies falls into, and you cannot be like him and write effective horror instead of ridiculous horror. I should say, if for some ridiculous reason you plan on reading this book, there will be plenty of spoilers ahead, so maybe read it first and come back to this. But I don't recommend reading it. Point number 1, the characters. Now, I'm not too fussy about character names generally. I use a lot of ridiculous character names in my books. I think you can be creative with them. I think you can be flexible. But when you're trying to convey something scary, your characters need to be at least somewhat believable. So the characters in this book start with our protagonist, Tuppence Trilby, the beautiful American model who nobody can look at without wanting to possess, who moves to England and is just so fabulously successful and wonderful that nobody has anything bad to say about her. Tuppence Trilby is her name. Okay, ridiculous. That's okay. That's not too bad. The main villain in the piece is named Ludo Struth, S-T-R-E-W-T-H, Struth. Clearly a name designed to reek with villainy. He is a evil taxidermist, and already I think you can see the problem. An evil taxidermist is not the most believable or interesting character. So we have that. And then, of course, the third important character in the book, the love interest / rescuer of Tuppence Trilby, is Deck Winner, the volunteer firefighter / doctor of industrial chemistry. I'm not making this up. That's actually what his character is. Again, great for maybe a romance novel. For a horror novel, not so good. Point number 2 is motivations of characters. So Ludo Struth is our antagonist. He's the evil taxidermist. And the book begins with him creating a hand of glory, which for those of you not familiar with folklore is the severed hand of a criminal who was hung to death. That is then you put magic spells over it and it comes to life, and it's supposed to give you thieves' powers, essentially. You can put people to sleep in the house you want to rob, you can turn invisible, things like that. Why he wants to create this hand is never really explained, and they give the hand powers that are not in canon, not traditionally attributed to the hand. This is a very odd thing for him to want to do as an evil taxidermist. There's no real motivation for him to want to create this hand of glory, but he goes to great lengths to do it. One of the things the hand does, the main thing the hand does in the book, which again I don't endorse because it's not part of authentic folklore, is it brings all his taxidermy animals to life. Okay, so we have living stuffed animals that will do his bidding and are evil. Why? Nobody knows. Then when he meets Tuppence Trilby, who moves into his alleyway for no reason, despite the fact that she is kind of creeped out by it, she desperately wants to buy a house there, and she buys a house there, and he sees her, and he immediately falls in love with her, and he wants to skin her and preserve her as one of his taxidermied animals so he can preserve her beauty forever. Again, why? It's not clear. This is just, insanity motivation, which is interesting because they keep coming back and saying, oh, he was, teetering on the brink of madness, or he felt madness starting to overcome him. It's like, no, you're past that point, buddy. You're long past that. If you're thinking about skinning a woman and turning her into a taxidermy piece for your collection, you're mad. You're not teetering on anything. You're there. So the motivations for the characters are odd. And then there's these kind of heroic, I want to get into these later, but I'll say briefly, there's these heroic museum artifact soldiers who come to life to protect Tuppence Trilby. Again, not really clear what their motivation is or why they're there to help, but they're there. So unclear motivations. I think one of the important things if you're writing horror is you want to suck people into the story more than other genres. You can do comedy or lighthearted romance and stuff. People don't have to be that emotionally invested. But for horror, you have to scare people. You have to elicit that emotion. And in order to do that, they have to take your story seriously, and they have to be invested, and they have to be bought in, and they have to suspend disbelief. And I don't know how anybody's suspending disbelief in this, because none of the characters are behaving like characters, none of the characters have any clear motivations, and they all have ridiculous names and job titles. Point 3, and this goes into the believability thing, is dialogue. Now, his dialogue, I'll have to give him credit, is not terrible when two characters are talking to one another. He can get away with sort of having corny dialogue. But the thing that he does that drives me crazy in this book is he has characters talk to themselves out loud in things that nobody would ever say to themselves out loud. And it really takes me out of the story. It makes me wonder, like, what's going on? Why are these people having these long monologues to themselves out loud? It's not a good way to do it. If you're going to write that's kind of inward thought, just make it a thought. It's one word difference. Instead of saying she said, say she thought. And it's fine. It doesn't break the reality of it. But I'll give you an example here for Tuppence Trilby's dialogue to herself when she's completely alone. She says, "Well, that's just not possible. There's nothing out there, nothing to show anything happened at all. I'd be hard pushed to convince anyone that that door just locked itself." And then later on the same page, she says, "I've got to know, I've got to see for myself," she whispered. She whispers this to herself. Nobody talks that way. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. Doesn't work. Pulls you right out of the story. You know, I think dialogue is one of the hard things to do well, or at least everyone tells me it's hard. I've always not found it that hard because I just think about how people would talk in real life, and I try to write that down, and it doesn't seem that difficult to me. It's like if you read it out loud and it sounds stilted, rewrite it. But people seem to struggle with it. But the one thing you should never do is have your characters talk to themselves in long monologues as if they are talking to other people. So I'm against that. Okay, moving along. Point number 4 is wrong choice of animals. Now, I mentioned that Ludo Struth is an evil taxidermist, which means he has lots of animals lying around. And I mentioned that the Hand of Glory mysteriously brings all these animals to life to do his bidding. This is an opportunity and a pitfall for horror, okay? Animals can be scary. We had Cujo. You have things like wolves and ravens that are scary, but the author picks all the wrong animals. The things that come to life to attack and molest Tuppence and go after them are not scary at all. The big one is bears, okay? Now, I know bears in the wild. If you encountered a bear in the woods, you would be scared because they're big, massive animals with giant claws and big teeth, and they're scary animals. But bears in popular culture are just kind of cute and cuddly. You think of people like Winnie the Pooh. They climb trees. They bumble along. They go swimming. Like, if you've seen bears in zoos, they're adorable. They're huge and powerful, but they're cute. You know, they're not scary. And so he has all these bears going after Tuppence and Deck Winter. And there's one point where the bears are like going out of control and he can't control them and they're running off and he's like, "Come back, you bears." I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's not scary at all. And then elsewhere he's got like porcupines stabbing people with their quills. Porcupines, again, they're cute. They're not scary. You could use snakes or lizards or spiders. There's a hierarchy of animal scariness. Porcupines are way down that list. I don't know what he was thinking about that. And then, yeah, when the animals go out of control and he can't control them, there's one part where they all run into a burning building and get burnt up. And he's like, "You fools, come back, don't run into the burning building." Nothing scary about that. It's just absurd. And this is a point I wanted to, I think it's the main point of the book, not of the book, but of my critique of the book, is the line between scary and absurd. If you think back to the Harry Potter books, they have the boggart charm, the ridiculous charm, where you create you transform the thing you're afraid of into something that's a parody of it, that it's impossible to take seriously and impossible to be afraid of. And that's kind of the key to why this book fails so badly, is that it continuously just veers over into ridiculous absurdity. And it's impossible to be afraid when you're in the realm of ridiculous absurdity. Stuffed bears being set on fire because they're wandered into a burning building and want to obey their master is not scary, it's absurd. People named Tuppence Trilby and Deck Winter, who is a chemical engineer as well as a firefighter, it's absurd. It's not something you can take seriously. All this Hand of Glory business, all of this like no motivation stuff, you can't take it seriously. And so the fact that you can't take any of these things seriously means you can't get scared. You can't get sucked into the story. You can't really buy into what's going on. So I think that is a real failing of the book. Which brings me to point number 5, and I mentioned this briefly before. These are the rescuer heroes. You have this whole army of basically old-timey soldier dudes from the museum who somehow, for some reason, come to life to protect the heroine of the story, Tuppence Trilby. And they are, that's an okay fine thing. You can have historical ghosts who show up to help. That's been done before. That's not a bad idea. But the mistake he makes, apart from their lack of motivation and their lack of explanation for why they're there, is that they are too corporeal. You know, when you have a mysterious ghost from the past that's there to help you, you want them to be misty and ephemeral and show up just in the nick of time and then disappear back into the mists of time again. You don't want them to be just like guys. And that's what he does in this book. All these soldiers that come out are just guys, and they're completely solid. They're just act like anybody else, and they're all befuddled by the time difference. They're like, oh, I'm not used to having a woman stand up for herself and talk back to me like they do now. In my time, that never would have happened. Like the ridiculous time traveler stuff. That's not scary. That's not mysterious. There's nothing kind of, you know, otherworldly or supernatural about it. It's just a bunch of time traveling soldiers who are confused about where they are and what they're doing and who talk in hilarious old timey English. That doesn't work at all. It's a complete failure. And so, you know, all these things combined is you have this book, which, you know, someone worked hard on. Someone spent a lot of time on making this like 450-page book that is supposed to be scary. I'm assuming it's supposed to be scary. I mean, look at the cover. Shadows in the Watchgate. It's got evil bears. It could just be a romance novel with a horror glean on top of it, but I really think it's supposed to be scary. And it just completely fails on every count because there's nothing believable about it. And there's nothing that draws you in and makes you emotionally bought in. And you're just, you know, forced to laugh at how stupid all the plot devices are. And like how easily he could have changed it to do something that's more scary. You know, if he'd used snakes instead of bears and spiders instead of porcupines, like get rid of the evil taxidermist thing, like you could have done a lot more. But it doesn't I don't buy it. It doesn't sell. It doesn't ring true in any sense of the imagination. And for horror to work, it has to ring true. And this just doesn't. So my experiment in buying a cheap $2 secondhand fun thriller read that I thought I could just breeze through and enjoy and have a good time with kind of failed because I didn't enjoy the book. It's not even like worth reading as up for a laugh because it's just cheesy and it's boring. And it's like it took me a lot longer to get through it than I thought it would. But, you know, I tried it, and I've got a couple of other books I bought on that trip that are science fiction books that I'm going to read as well, and hopefully I'll get a laugh out of those. But, you know, if nothing else, it gave me a topic for a video, and I hope that this is some useful advice to any aspiring horror writers. You want to make it believable. You can do some kind of fun horror things with zombies and stuff, but if the emotions aren't real, if the characters aren't real, if you can't buy in at all, you're not going to feel that emotion of fear. It's a little bit like, you know, the opposite of stand-up comedy or something, where you're trying to elicit this spontaneous emotion of laughter. In this case, you're trying to elicit this spontaneous emotion of fear. It's got to be real in order for people to do it. Otherwise, they're going to be detached, they're going to be distracted, and they're not going to really feel the tension that you're trying to build up. There is no tension in this book. They try to build it up a bunch of times, but it never successfully works because the characters are always jabbering inanely to themselves, or you have crazy, you know, ridiculous zombie animals wandering around on fire. There's no real tension. It doesn't work. So that's what I thought. I'm sorry if Mike Jefferies ever gets wind of this. I feel bad about how hard I was on your book. I know you worked hard on it, but you know, I really think we can learn a lot from your book. Look, my copy says Bickers on the side. I don't know what that's all about, but I think we can learn a lot from your book, and hopefully people will not make the same mistakes as this author in the future. I don't think he's writing anymore. I couldn't find any recent stuff from him. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that. My name is Logan Albright. I will be back again shortly with another video. Keep those views coming. Keep those likes and comments coming. I respond to all the comments, so feel free to leave me one down below, and I always read everything. And if you like this video and want to see more like it, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you next time.